Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome, everybody, to Great Shot Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that focuses on the aspects of filmmaking that sometimes get overlooked or stay behind the scenes. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And, as always, of course, you can reach us at thenerdparty.com/contact and drop a line to Great Shot Kid. While you're at thenerdparty.com, look at all of the other shows that we have, for every taste, from Harry Potter to Star Wars to Doctor Who. To Star Trek, even, and many more on the way, or that you can find over on Filibuster, where we're currently doing a countdown to Infinity War, and which is a whole network-wide thing. You can hear every host in the course of that. And, of course, you can find us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, on Instagram, The Nerd Party, and Facebook, The Nerd Party. Use the hashtag Great Shot Kid and let us know you're talking about us. So, yeah, welcome to Great Shot Kid. And, Mike, as always, a pleasure to see you and talk to you.
You too. You know, I was just looking at your Letterboxd account.
Uh-oh. Oh, that's trouble.
And I see that you recently watched Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie.
Oh, yes. Rewatched. Yeah.
It's pretty solid, you know, all things considered.
Yeah, it is.
Did you see it in the theater?
Of course I did.
Yeah.
It played in one theater in the D.C. area. And I went with my friend Joey. He figures into a lot of my movie going from that era in my life. And we had to go down to DuPont Circle. And, but it was a very small theater, and it was great. I remember loving it then. I loved it again this time, too. It's just, you remember me, Shrinky Dink. Like, it's just great jokes, man. Those guys were so funny, are so funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to see it in the theater too because, you know, obviously huge MST3K fan in high school and everything like that. And there were a couple of friends and I who were like, let's go do this, you know. So we went opening night to the one theater that it was playing in Chicago, Piper's Alley, which was the worst theater in the city. But it was sort of like known as the art theater. So like when Punch Drunk Love opened up, you know, it opened exclusively at Piper's Alley, but like they scratched every print and the sound was all mangled and mono usually and everything. It was terrible, but it was packed, you know, it's like sold out show. There's this one woman who was like obsessed with Tom Servo. She kept, every time he'd tell a joke, she'd be like, "Oh, Tommy, you're so naughty. Oh, Tommy, you're such a bad boy." It's really, really strange.
Wow. That is bizarre. That's disturbing in a way. You know, I actually, for some reason, I seem to remember that I remember actually sitting next to Joey, and I remember there were two guys sitting. There was us and there was a row. Then there were the two guys in front. For some reason, I seem to remember there was a pillar breaking up the audience seating in this theater.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Like it was literally like in a basement. So this was like a support pillar for the building sort of thing.
Yeah. We've got a theater like that here in Chicago, which just reopened for Force Awakens, the Oakbrook Mall Theater, where in their big auditorium, they've got a few pillars, which is pretty great. But, you know, weird architecture. It's always cool in movie theaters. But
you know, what's really funny about that, actually, wow, it's funny how memories come back to you. Okay. Romeo and Juliet, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, which I still adore to this day. I saw it at the Rockville, Maryland. It was a United Artists Theater at the time. And it was really weird. You had to like go into the parking garage, and then like the easiest way to get there was like you had to go down an escalator underground and then like go to the box office, and like you were literally like as far underground as you could possibly go, like down where the subway runs sort of thing. And I remember the theater, it was still not stadium seating. And I remember the film as well because I went with a girl that I was striking a relationship back up with. Always a good idea. Because I remember she kissed me on the cheek when she got up to go to the restroom at one point. And I was like, it's happening. And but just like thinking of you mentioning like us talking about the rundown theaters, that it was run down. It later got redone, and it was the first Regal Cinemas that I ever ran across. And I remember because they redid how you entered it, and so instead of going into the parking garage, like basically they turned it into its own facade with like sandwich shops next to it with a Potbelly. Actually, it's the first Potbelly I ever saw, and that originated in Chicago, didn't it?
I don't know. We do have them here. It did. Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, no, just talking about the old theaters just reminded me of that memory. Just wow, came galloping out of nowhere. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's weird. I mean there's a lot of theaters in this area which seem to be opening up again, like that have been shuttered, which are reopening, because it seems like a lot of the theater chains, now that they've installed the recliners, obviously that cuts down on like half your seating, right? But it's worth it because you're getting like twice as many people in the door. But the problem is now there's too much demand to meet the supply instead of the other way around. So like a lot of theater chains are like, well, we closed this theater like 10 years ago, but it's right next to this other one which keeps on selling out. So let's open it like really fast just so that we can get more seats, and that's what happened with this one, the Oakbrook Theater that I was talking about. Like, it was so bizarre because like, they had two theaters at this mall back in the day. They had one inside the mall, and then they had one out in the parking lot. And the one in the parking lot was weird because it used to be this massive screen with 70 millimeter. That's actually where, like, in like the Chicago area, with 70 millimeter and everything, like that's where like Star Wars opened up and stuff, and in whatever it was, the 80s or whatever, they decided to do that thing that happened where they would, twin these large theaters, and like you would go into like the auditorium. I remember seeing Unbreakable there. You'd go into the auditorium and like you could see like on the back wall, like the way that the architecture was, like literally they just had this massive auditorium and they stuck a wall in the center, and now it became two auditoriums, which were much smaller, and it's like, okay, this doesn't really work. But they had that one outside, and then inside they had this like small 4-screen theater, with like the pillars and in the big theaters and stuff like that. And they tore down the one outside to make it a parking lot. And this one, they just like boarded up, and they had like an Urban Outfitter on the other side and stuff. And every time I was at that mall, I'd be like, oh, look at that. You can kind of see where the box office was, that sort of thing. And one day I'm just walking through the mall. This is about a month before Force Awakens comes out. I'm walking through the mall and I see a sign that says like movie theater that way. And I'm like, what? And like I found a security guard and I'm like, it says movie theater that way. What is that? And they're like, oh yeah, they're opening up the movie theater. And like I walked down there and like there were literally guys like, bringing recliners off of trucks, and it's like they put in new screens, they put in digital projectors, took out the 35 millimeter, put in, the recliners, some new carpet, a little bit of paint. You got the concession stand all sort of like outlined there, just bring in all the new equipment and boom. And it was like literally like in the span of a month, this thing was open. Because they had a hard deadline. It was December 19th or whatever it was that Force Awakens came out. So so and then that was successful enough that they actually built like a big 12-screen with all the fancy dancy stuff in another part of the mall. And it's like, wow, now that mall has 2 theaters in it again. It went from 2 to 0 back to 2.
I remember, and the thing is, you told a story, I think, having to do with RoboCop 2 when we were talking with Brandon about that a little bit ago. Now I'm thinking of at Wheaton Plaza, there in Wheaton, Maryland. There was the Wheaton Plaza 11 theater, which was outside, and then there was the Cineplex Odeon 4, which was in such a state of disrepair, we called it the Cineplex Odious. And I saw Alien 3 in that, as well as Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and Glengarry Glen Ross in that Cineplex Odeon 4. And then the 11 is, I think, that's where I saw RoboCop 2. I also saw Bram Stoker's Dracula there. And wow, it's this like story of watching film. But I got to ask, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. I can't believe we haven't, if we haven't, but I can't recall. Seating. Like Star Wars, I can picture the type of seating I was in for every one of these things.
Yeah.
And it's so weird because it's almost like a history of movie seating. And, we know the projection stuff that Lucas was on the forefront of and everything. But it's like, you prefer recliners or do you prefer the old, the rake before the pre-stadium seating?
The sloped seating.
Yeah. Well, in theater, it was called a rake. But
Okay. In the industry, we call it sloped.
Well, there you go. There you go. See, that's the difference between live theater and movie theater right there.
There
just
you go.
For you. Which type of seating do you wind up preferring?
I prefer stadium seating because, you don't have to worry about looking over people's heads, I mean, as much as I love the Music Box in Chicago, especially considering the fact that, they have very sort of like narrow aisles and everything, and their seats are very, very old. It's like one of those things where even though there are, 700 seats in the theater, there's like 2 which are good, like you want that center aisle with like where people can walk across so you get plenty of leg room, or you want to get on an aisle because there's like 3 basically sections, with like 2 aisles going down the length of the theater, and you really want to sit on like the aisle on one of the wings so that you get a clear sight line. Otherwise, you're going to be looking over someone's head. And I've watched a lot of movies like that, and I don't particularly like it. So stadium seating, I thought, was kind of innovative. Although, like you're talking about Star Wars and, Lucas, I remember, someone saying, when episode 1 came out, they're like, I'm going to be sitting on the bottom, no stadium seating for me, because when that crawl comes, it's designed so that you're looking up at it, right? And I can see that, I guess. But the funny thing is, like, I don't, I don't know. It's gotten to, it really depends on the auditorium. I mean, I think what you see, no matter what, is like, people always gravitate towards like in a stadium seating theater where you've got like the front section and then the back where you go up. People always go for that first row, right? Like they want to put their feet on that railing or something.
Oh, you mean the first row that's the break between the sections?
Right.
Oh, yeah, no, yes, absolutely. You race to get there as quick as you can. Yes.
And I've been, I that's naturally where I go too, but I've noticed in like some of these big theaters, like the Oak Brook, where they've got the Dolby Cinema at the Oak Brook, like, people like sitting, people will start there and then go back. And it's like, there are people who just sit in the last row of a theater. I mean, Roger Ebert, very famously, after, I think personally, misunderstanding what his, optometrist told him, would always sit basically in the very last row, of the theater in order to see the entire screen. But to me, like, if you're going to see something on the big screen, it should be an immersive experience. So
completely agree.
Numerous theaters where I'm sitting in, like, the last row of the front section instead of the first row of the back section because I want to experience this on the big screen, and it's still not too close,
I remember with the old, I'll use your industry's term, the old sloped seating at the movie theater that finally showed up in my little backwater. It was specifically, and it depended on which auditorium you went into, because of course it was always, it was 9 cinemas, but you always hoped there were like 4 good ones, and then the other 5 were those little rinky-dink ones that were like giant televisions, and it was just like, oh God, please be playing in the good one.
Yep.
And you were always so disappointed when you walked in, and they would say something like Theater 5. Oh. But I remember it was always in Auditorium 1, and I think the 6th or the 7th one, it was, for me, it was always the seventh row, not right on the end, but like third or fourth seat in was always like perfect. I don't know why. I never understood why it worked like that, but it did.
It's one of those weird things. I mean, I guess everyone has their seat, you know. And the thing about the sloped theaters now, you know, before it's like, oh no, you don't want that, you know, whatever, because of stadium seating. Now, because of the recliners, like it's a lot easier to do the recliners on the sloped floor than on this, you know, with stadium seating.
Yeah.
You basically have to rebuild the whole thing or whatever. And I find that, you know, like the recliners do tend to, like from a viewing standpoint, work better on the sloped floor because usually you get more leg room. You know, it takes up so much space to have those steps that usually, like, you know, you recline your seat, you know, and then you end up like kicking a wall in front of you, and it's like, okay,
Yeah,
this isn't exactly ideal. Like these recliners are great, maybe not the best for stadium seating, you know, but yeah, I mean, like talking about like those like specific seats in theaters or whatever. I mean, I think I told the story where I, you know, pulled the seat of my choosing out of the theater that I worked at. And, you know, I mean, that's definitely like a thing, you know, like when I go to, you know, Oak Brook or what, I've got my seat. And then when I go to this place, you know, the Music Box, I got my seat there, you know, whatever. And that's why, like, there's such like a mad dash, I think, whenever tickets go on sale for, you know, these big blockbusters now.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's not like I got to get my ticket before they sell out. It's I got to get my seat before someone else takes it, you know? It's strange.
So here's a question though. As a fellow cinephile, do you think that the new projection methods truly make any difference to how much you've enjoyed watching films? Do you think that digital has done anything to enhance your overall experience?
You know, it's interesting because, I mean, you could take this back to home video too. You know, I mean, this is sort of like my go-to all the time. Like, I have 4K, HDR, blah, 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 you know. I mean, I'm going to watch, you know, Baby Driver in HDR 4K, you know, tomorrow or whatever. And
it's a good choice.
It's amazing that you can do that, right? But, like, as exciting as that is, as exciting as it is to, you know, just click on a button and instantly get Last Jedi in the best format available on your, you know, Apple TV or whatever, like, I will never be more excited than I was getting, you know, Aliens, you know, in a box set on Laserdisc, you know, in stereo sound and everything. And like, I've hooked my Laserdisc player up to my 4K HDR TV, and let me tell you, it looks like absolute garbage. And yet, you know, back in the day, it's like, this is the best it's ever going to get, you know? And so, I mean, I guess the answer is like, no. And in terms of like theater presentation or whatever, I mean, it's so strange. Like, when digital came about, it was like, oh my God, it's perfect because it had all of the things that we could control, like as projectionists, you know, like, you know, you want to make sure the image is as focused as possible. You want to make sure the image is as stable as possible. And you go to great, you know, lengths in order to make those things happen. And in the end, usually it's like, that's almost dead on. You know, that's almost perfect. And then you see those things, you know, in digital, and it's like, that is perfect. Like, that is exactly, you know, focused down to the pixel. That's framed down to the pixel. There is absolutely no judder in that image at all. This is the best thing I've ever seen. But, you know, now that film has basically gone away and we watch everything on digital, now it's like, oh, I can see how the contrast isn't as good. This transfer is really not the best. That image looks kind of muddy. What I would really like is just a nice, clean film image, 35 millimeter image. And then when you see it, even though it does have the judder, and even though it does have, you know, the the soft edges or whatever, you look at it and you're like, okay, well, I know that that's exactly how the movie's supposed to look. I know that the colors are not off on The Big Lebowski because I'm watching it as it was originally back in 1998. And so, I think it all levels off sooner or later, when you see HDR for the first time, you're like, this is the best thing ever. But sooner or later, it's like, well, that's just how it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of, the forward march of technology or anything, but it's just, I don't remember any film experience I've had in the digital age where I said, well, that movie was okay, but at least it looked great. Taking it outside of like the director of photography thing, I wasn't sitting there saying, oh, well, it's 3 stars, but I'm going to give it 4 because there were no film scratches, or I didn't hear any hiss on the soundtrack, or, it's so funny because to speak to your point about leveling off, my first and only exposure to Star Wars for years, or The Empire Strikes Back or anything, was flawed film presentations. And it did nothing to dampen anybody's embrace or love of these films. And I think it's funny because I think that the perfect projection thing is just supposed to be for the sake of the filmmaker, which I totally support and I totally get. They know that what they created is supposed to be up there, but there are still mistakes that happen with the digital. Like I talked to you about Black Panther, where I was like, the lettering there doesn't look like, it's pixelated on the edges. That my understanding of digital is that's not supposed to be a thing that happens. Like I'm supposed to see smooth, clean edges on lettering. Why is this happening? And it infuriates me because if we were in the era of film and something was like a little off or a little blurry or like there was a skip or something, I was like, oh, okay, well that's, an imperfection. Now, if I don't get perfect, if I don't get spot on perfect, or if the colors look a little washed out, or there's this one theater that's closest to me that I go to because it's always that contest back and forth. But I swear, whoever's running their digital projector doesn't really know what they're doing, because they're when I watched, for instance, Greatest Showman, not speaking about the quality of the effects or anything, but it just looked weird, the contrast settings were off. It had this weird pallor to it where I was like, what the heck? I know this is being projected digitally. This should look right. That's the whole point.
They probably had the 3D polarizer up in front of the screen. That's always the first thing that I check whenever I go into a theater. I look up, and if I see 2 of an image coming out of that porthole instead of 1, I'm like, oh God.
Now, do you mean 2 where you'll see it's a double pane of glass and there's 1 image and then 1 image
usually you see a single pane of glass, and instead of just the light shining through the pane of glass, where you can see reflecting off of that glass the image, you'll see the image twice, stacked on top of each other, one on top of the other.
Okay.
If you see that, then 9 times out of 10, that means that the 3D polarizer is in place, which cuts down on the light dramatically. And then the question is, how many people do you have to talk to before someone will remove it and give you a nice, bright, clean, sharp image, And I find myself picking my movie theaters based on who consistently removes the 3D polarizer from in front of the lens, because it's gotten to be a problem where I'm I'm paying all this money to see this movie. And that's really what it comes down to. Any theater can have as many bells and whistles as it says it does, but if you don't have someone taking the time to just do a basic thing, then it's going to look like garbage,
And you know what, though? I think that for you, for me, for other people out there, especially people listening to us, because they're obviously discerning cinephiles, it makes a difference to us. But the biggest lesson for me that I walked away with from the movie-going experience of Black Panther, besides the fact that with these recliners, I would still like to put in a small like really razor thin needle, so that if somebody pulled up their phone, like I had to put my leg up, like I had to bend my leg in half and like angle my chair back because some jerk face can't go 30 minutes without looking at his phone. Just a little pinprick with like Novocaine so that your hand goes numb. So, and they drop their phone. They can't, I can't operate my phone. I don't know why. Wears off by the end of the film. This is an innovation I would support in filmmaking. But my biggest takeaway from that film going experience, people don't care.
Yeah.
They really don't. Because if people cared, they would be, and yes, plenty of people have talked about the unevenness of the effects in Black Panther. I sort of railed against the unevenness of the effects in The Last Jedi because there were a couple where I was like, come on, guys, I know you're better than this. This doesn't make sense. And like you and me, we might go in and be like, oh, the colors are washed out. Oh, that's pixelated. I honestly don't think people care. So it's almost as if all of this innovation has been put into the projection for nothing. You know, like it's almost like it just doesn't matter. Well, I mean, there's all of this innovation put out there and people just don't even care.
Well, I'll tell you why the innovation is put out there. I mean, it's a very clear and obvious thing, which is not at all glamorous. It's the fact that it's saving the studios millions of dollars. That's why digital exists. It's not even because of the theaters wanting to, whatever. It's the studios who are benefiting because they don't have to make prints that cost $1,000 and they don't need to ship them across the world, I mean, there's other advantages for sure, and there's also disadvantages. But the thing that drove it more than anything else was the fact that it was saving the studios a bunch of money.
So it's just another way to squeeze another 30 cents out of my $15 that I pay.
It really is ticket. It's when you think about it, I mean, it's just, it makes perfect sense. Like, a 35 millimeter print, it weighs what, 50 pounds? You got to ship it. It costs, a lot to manufacture that thing, which you're going to be using for maybe like 3 weeks before you melt it down and recycle it, and turn it into something else. I mean, it's a very inefficient thing.
Is that what they did?
Yeah, because they're prints? Polyester.
So they would melt them and turn them into other film prints?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know exactly how they recycled them or whatever, but yeah, they were like chopped up into whatever, the way you would recycle anything. It's just polyester.
It never ever occurred to me what happened to the print after it was done.
Yeah,
it's a thought that never came into my brain.
They say, I mean, it goes around, and like you see the distribution model changing, obviously because of it. But they make 2,000 prints, let's just say, ship it all over the country, and then after 3 or 4 weeks or whatever, it finishes playing at those theaters, so then they ship it to the second run theaters, who are running the print for the second time. That's where and then after all of them play it, then that's why you would get for a lot of movies, international release dates, which are later. Right. Then, because it's like, oh, no. And there's true. I mean, like when I was a projectionist, there would be time, like I remember, I think it was like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels or whatever. I could be wrong about that, but there were certainly movies where it like opened in the UK and then we would get the print, 2 months later. And it was weird because, most of the prints are manufactured in the US, but those were manufactured in the UK. And you'd see like different, like heads and tails because it came from a different lab, color would be spelled with a U or whatever, you know what I mean? And it was just kind of, and they'd be a little worn out, some of them might be scratched, some of them might be dirty because that's, they played at other theaters. So now you don't have to do that, right? And I mean, now you beam the movie to theaters via satellite and, you can move it to any auditorium. You can play it in 1 million theaters at once if you want, You can do marathons. You can do this 18 movie marathon, and you can do it in 1,000 theaters across the country because you don't have to have 1,000 prints of each of these movies.
So then setting aside, of course, like Netflix and streaming and stuff like that, that would be just yet another nail in the coffin of the second run theater. There's no second run now. Like there's no cost for the studio to try to soak back up by having a print run at a second run theater.
I don't know. I don't exactly know how they work because there aren't a lot of them around, and I think there are fewer now. But the two things that I see happening, one, there is a market for it in that, it's cheaper, so more people go to see it, and they're playing it at the end of, the film's theatrical life cycle, right? So you can kind of get away with it in that sense, but it also it happens faster. Like they'll start playing movies, like they might not play them the week that they open, but they'll start playing them like 2 weeks down the line instead of 2 months down the line. And then the other thing that happens that's happening, I think, and I don't 100% know, but it seems to me that a lot of those second run theaters have become first run theaters because there is more of a demand for it there. But that's kind of how I see it happening, because that as everyone knows, the theatrical window is shrinking, right? Movies are coming out on video much faster than they used to.
Yeah. Okay. And I think this might be something to discuss at another time as well, but not absolute tops, not your absolute favorite or anything like that, but a favorite, one of your favorite as a film goer, not as somebody who, has projected film or anything like that. What is one of your favorite film goer experience? What is one of your favorite movie theater memories?
The one that I always think of, which, just kind of talking about a variation of it here, I can't see anything topping it really, is when the first Avengers movie came out, and we went to the, at that point, 6-movie marathon, I think, right?
Yeah.
And all of this leading up to Avengers, it was pretty great. They had sold out like 2 theaters, and, it was just the excitement, the anticipation, everything. It was the first time I had ever really done anything like that, gone to like a 6-movie marathon. And, like later in the summer, they're like, we're doing a trilogy for Dark Knight, and that was it wasn't as great, as an experience. Then, of course, when episode 7 came out, they did that, and it's like, yeah, but they had to start it so early that it was kind of like just a daze. But there's something about that Avengers one. Maybe it's because it's the first time or whatever, but that was like, I think, the single best movie-going experience I've ever had. What about you?
One that comes to mind actually has to be there's a theater that's, I think, a historic theater in Baltimore, the Senator. And one thing that they used to do is every Christmas, you wouldn't buy a ticket. Your price of admission was you had to show up with a donation, either a monetary donation or a bag of groceries to donate to the Maryland Food Bank. And then they would have a legit double feature where they would show the 1951 Alastair Sim Scrooge, a Tom and Jerry Christmas cartoon, the one where Tom thinks he's in hell, and then It's a Wonderful Life. And I remember the first time I went to it, it was with my buddy Mike, and I'll never forget how beautiful it was that, first off, everybody was into I got to see the 1951 Scrooge. As everybody knows, I adore adaptations of A Christmas Carol, and to see that one on the big screen was just magical. And then how quiet and weepy the theater got during It's a Wonderful Life. Like such an amazing. That's the thing that I think you miss with the home streaming and stuff. You can connect with a film. You can have a magic moment with a film. You can watch it with your family. But when you're in that theater for something like It's a Wonderful Life or Titanic even, where the entire theater is just crying and have this big cathartic thing about, oh my gosh, time is passing and we all should be decent to each other sort of stuff. Like that is, that's the root of live theater and of course movie theaters and everything like that. And it's like, not to get all grumpy old man sort of thing, but like I think society needs more of that. Needs more like people coming together and having that shared communal cry session or happy session, or like that's what you're going to for the movie theater. It isn't even so much the film; it's like going to going to a U2 concert, and you're walking out. It's like, oh yeah, remember when Bono sang that song? That's what you're going for. That's what you're paying for, and it's like. That's why I wish things weren't so sterile and why people weren't checking their phones and stuff. But yeah, I definitely go back to that. Seeing that double feature for the first time was just absolute magic. Crisp, cold air outside, just beautiful.
Yeah, I do love that stuff. I love that sort of theme stuff, and also going to see movies with an audience. One of the things that I found, like Music Box does these midnight shows every weekend, and I found that the audience there seems to be a slightly larger audience on Saturday nights than there is on Friday nights. So I usually kind of try to gravitate towards the Saturday night screening because I know that everyone's going to be into it and it's going to be what you're talking about, a community experience. So
yeah, man, that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Well, if people want to trade their own movie theater stories with you, where can they find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, and you can also find me on a brand new show called Film Damage, which is now on the internet. It is me and my co-host Max talking about film from the perspective of the booth. Two former projectionists talking about. We start each episode with kind of something about the booth, whether it's talking about how we, thread a movie or build a print or whatever. And then we get into a discussion of whatever it is we're discussing that week. And we just launched yesterday. We've got 3 episodes out for you. We've got one in which we talk about what Thursday night in the booth was like, what it was that we had to do every Thursday night for like 10 years. And then we've got another episode where we talk about, the Nerd Party's, a friend of the Nerd Party, Nick Anastasio, about the visual effects of Black Panther and what he did on that movie. And then we have a good old-fashioned audio commentary for Baby Driver. And
audio commentaries with Mike and Max, folks, are well worth your time. Always well worth your time.
And speaking of which, we also have 3 more episodes coming out for you tomorrow, in which we're calling them CTS Classic, where we go back to our old show commentary track stars, and we cut them down into sort of best of things. So we've got 3 of those where we've got segments from our Die Hard 2 commentary, our very first commentary from 8 years ago, and then also an off-topic in which we discuss the casting of an unknown actor named Tom Hardy in an unknown role in Batman 3. So definitely head on over to filmdamagepod.com and check that out, or you can also find us on Twitter at Film Damage.
Awesome, very awesome. And of course, you can find me crawling out there as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. And you can go on over to Aggressive Negotiations for some fun Star Wars talk with me and Matthew Rushing, where we delve into the nooks and crannies of the Star Wars English muffin. So thanks again for joining us. And remember, we'd love to hear your stories, too, about your favorite movie theater memories.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.